Welcome to Jolie's, where you can get spicy sausage, roasted nuts, and the freshest React content on all of YouTube. Today, I'm going to be watching Our Culture is Collapsing, The Future of Storytelling by Real Life Fake Wizard. But before I get into that, I would really love to see how quickly we can get this community up to 100 subscribers. 103 digits. Easy peasy. And you know how we're going to make that easy? Where you're going to take whatever appendage you deem acceptable, responsible, and you're going to hit that like button, you're going to hit that subscribe button, and why not ring that bell while you're doing it? Well, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into this video. 3, 2, 1.
Look at the box office results for 2024, and you're going to see the top 20 or so grossing projects are all legacy properties, sequels, remakes, soft reboots, or film adaptations of books. And
I do agree that we need to revitalize things, but film adaptation of books is, just tried and true. We've had those forever. A book is just a more personal way of getting a story out of somebody, and if it works on the page, you can figure out how to make it work for screen, or you could fail trying to figure out how to make it work for screen. I just would not include that damningly.
towards the later half of the year, I started watching lots of these movies in order to do a tier list stream on this channel, which I did. I suffered through the best Hollywood could make, and believe me, most of it was pathetic. Hundreds of millions of...
I should maybe I should even step in and say my own piece here near the top, because it feels like we're going to be getting into it, but I don't have any streaming service. The only subscription that I hold right now is YouTube Premium. I'm kind of giving up on this. Like if I don't see the movie in theater, I'm probably not going to watch it at home unless I'm watching it with, my girlfriend or something like that. And even then, I'm probably going to be playing games with her or showing her my favorite YouTube content. And I don't know if that's just an evolution of media and consumption of media, or if it's just because things have gotten worse and movies and TV shows are expensive to make, so that means only the corporations are making them, and I'm kind of like getting a little sick of corpo propaganda. So I don't have Netflix, I don't have Hulu, I don't have Max, I don't have any of those things. So looking forward to seeing what he has to say about this, because I haven't been watching these shows. I want to see what he thinks of them.
Dollars are being spent to practically tell the exact same stories over again with minor or sometimes massive adjustments. And of course, trying to sell feelings of nostalgia in places of originality and emotional connection. I say often that Hollywood writers hate themselves, they hate the world, and they hate you, the viewer and the customer.
I would say that if you are somebody who is creative and wants to be on the cutting edge of media in this day and age, you would not be going to Hollywood. You're going to Hollywood to capture something that maybe doesn't even exist anymore. I feel for some of my millennial brethren, because I feel this way, and it can be evoked in different ways. But I feel like I have had a rough start coming off the blocks, not as cleanly as I could have, because of the shifting landscape of media and trying to figure out where exactly I should land. I'm not an early adopter, and so I was waiting for the main internet broadcasting methods to be sorted out before I started doing this sort of thing. I'm not an adventurous person. I'm not going to be at the cutting edge myself, but I also feel for the people who were a little bit more ahead of me, but they wanted to follow in somebody else's footsteps, and thus, because tried and true works, with the right upbringing, the right resources, I might have followed along more seriously with this style. of life path where I would have been like, well, it worked for Steven Spielberg, it worked for Robert Zemeckis, I'm going to go into the movies. They got on the rat race, they followed the methods of getting there that become much more formalized. I think of what's her name? The woman who did The Acolyte, while much more successful and probably have bank accounts much more full than mine, they got tricked into, or not necessarily tricked, but they fell into their own trap of dedicating themselves to a form of media that is now getting labeled with the term legacy, and thus not cutting edge, and thus not like where you go to like actually be a revolutionary artist. The days of movies changing the culture, I think, are done. It's now, movies are now where culture goes to reaffirm its values. I would say TV is pretty much on the same path rapidly.
An age where writers, directors, creatives are no longer being...
Oh, sorry to my stepdad, but yeah, this right here, my God, I'm probably looking upon the future president of the United States. This right here is a prime example of the slop. When you're in a position where most of the people consuming your products are consuming slop, and you know it, that's a bad thing. Red One is primary example of slop, that, and this type of slop that I think Netflix inspired. I don't know if it was like a Netflix original, but I do know that it feels like a Netflix original.
Creative. Now, there are financial implications there, sure. Studios need to greenlight projects and make funds available to make said art. But the point remains that the art being produced right now is just not satisfying.
100%.
Rick Rubin, who many of you will recognize from his dramatic impacts in the music industry, explained very well in his book, The Creative Act, that the best way to be creative, in a sense, is to make the things you want to see made. Create things for yourself, and you will find an audience who shares similar sentiments and will appreciate your work. By making something...
Well, I mean, I do find it fascinating that he's saying this, because I do feel like a pillar of what we're talking about here is The Acolyte. I think that's going to be a 2024 peak of some sort, but not a good kind, like something that we always look back upon as like a turning point. I don't think it's the type of Star Wars that should be made right now, but I think it's the type of Star Wars that I want to say Lena Headey, that's an example of her making the art that she wanted to see made. Well, it's good advice, and you're always going to be able to be proud of whatever you did make. It's not always going to be true, or it's not always going to cause success. It could also be a pitfall. But let's see what he has to go on to say. I mean, but I will say, like, I'm sure she'll be able to stand by the Acolyte for the rest of her life, and the rest of life. Anybody who was in that show who truly believed in it, and they can be Principal Skinner and shake their fists and say, no, it is the fans who are wrong.
For you, you're going to be the most authentic and create the best possible work. I'm paraphrasing one of his lessons, of course. The point being, let's take that at face value. Let's say modern day Hollywood creatives are making things that they want to see. They're making things for them, and they're putting their best efforts into it. Is this truly the best they can do? Mufasa, Mary, Chronicles of Narnia, but this time with rock and roll. Rings of Power, The Acolyte, Final Fantasy VII remade into 100 different games.
Hey, whoa, buddy. Whoa, buddy. Final Fantasy Remake is a freaking classic with amazing music. I will not have this slander. But once he started listing things out, I knew The Acolyte was going to be on it. Rings of Power, I think it's sub-Acolyte. Like, I feel like Rings of Power is... At least the Acolyte was trying to say something. I don't know if the Rings of Power is trying to say anything.
Ridiculous censorship translating games from Eastern to Western markets. War of the Rohirrim. Even Wicked, to an extent.
Oh, I just saw Wicked. I felt very inspired. Kind of had a Dark Knight ending for the girls and the gays. Well, let's see where he goes with this. I'm You know, I'm just trying to sort out if he's the kind of person who has like a straight up agenda in all this, or you know, a cultural agenda, or if he has a quality agenda.
Many of the projects I've just named are mediocre representations of original source material that has been bastardized to make studios money. But they're doing it in a way that I believe is going to damage our culture over time. I believe the remakes, reductionism, and revisionist history of creative media means the death of creativity for future generations.
I just want to say this to get it out of the way. I find it interesting that he presents himself as a wizard, but has created his green screen like backdrop, like of where he's sitting as being the inside of an X-wing, or something very similar or reminiscent of an X-wing. Just wanted to throw that out there because, not that it's confusing me, but it just seems a little contradictory. But that could be what he's going for the you know, for the views. I mean, the fact that it intrigues me and I stopped to talk about it means it's probably successful.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to The Pondering. I am the real-life fake wizard. If this video brings you any value...
This is much more the set that I would imagine for the fake wizard.
I invite you to subscribe to this channel where we're posting new videos just as much as we can. This is a difficult topic to flesh out because most everyone is going to have a differing opinion. Even though something like Robert Eger's Nosferatu, which I enjoyed very much, could be considered quite good, it's still a deviation of a deviation of a deviation. A remake of a reinterpretation, tracking all the way back to Dracula, the original novel. And what was that based on? Vlad the Impaler, a historical figure, of course, but also vampires and variations of bloodsuckers can be found all throughout human history in different cultures throughout the world. See, it's more than just the Dracula novel to Robert Eger's film. There was all of human history before that with...
Oh, he's already giving me saying an amen, brother, right here. All of human history before that. That is something that I fully believe in. I hope he untangles it better coming up, because it is so complicated. It's just so hard to get into. If he can put words into my mouth, I'll accept them. I'll chew them up.
Even 99% of the stories, I don't know, and you don't know either. And to be clear, I'm not picking on Nosferatu 2024. I thought the movie was very good. Perhaps this is an outlier that got it right. So let's look at something else. Mufasa. Mufasa is big right now because it's competing with Sonic 3 at the box office.
I'm pretty sure that it is no longer in competition with Sonic 3. If I were to assume it is a footnote, a trivia question at this point. That's its destiny. You know, what year did they release the prequel to The Lion King?
Mufasa is a prequel sequel to Lion King 2019, which is an animated live-action remake of a Disney classic, The Lion King from 1994. But did you know that story is not original at all? It's Hamlet by William Shakespeare.
100%.
Yeah, it's the same story. And of course, Disney has always remade classic stories and made them into lovey-dovey princess films, haven't they? So the Disney reinterpretation...
Well, you know, during the 90s, I would say that they remade them into prince films. Beauty and the Beast was sort of the baton toss between the princess being the most important character to the prince, or the person vying for the princess being the most important character. Because then you had, at the very least, Aladdin and The Lion King, and I would never argue that Ariel and Snow White and Cinderella were the protagonists of those stories. I would say that Simba and Aladdin and, well, John Smith, Pocahontas is a little bit more wishy-washy. I feel like there's one more movie, though, in that Renaissance that I'm blanking on right now. It's not all princess movies. There's sometimes a prince movie in there as well.
Is not new, but yeah, The Lion King is just Hamlet. And Hamlet may not be the first...
Well, and also, if I understand Mufasa correctly, from what people have described, it's essentially just like Hamlet again, in a lot of ways. Like they tried to turn Mufasa into Simba.
Time that story was told either. The story of Hamlet could be tracked back to Amleth, which was a Viking tale from hundreds of years ago. Shakespeare is a hack. No, that's not what I'm saying, and that's not the point. I'm pretty sure Shakespeare even said he was inspired by the Viking story himself. I could be wrong.
Shakespeare, I think, citation needed, but I believe that most of Shakespeare's plays were inspired by other stories, whether they be remakes of their era or derivative isn't the right word, but like you said, like what he's doing here, like if I understand it correctly, Romeo and Juliet was essentially a remake of another play that involved that same thing. It's just Shakespeare was the guy who did it right, or at the very least was popular enough in his time for people to be inspired to save his work.
I'm no Shakespeare historian. The point
Neither am I.
2024's shitty Mufasa film is just a deviation after deviation after deviation away from stories that were told around the campfire. Human beings are creatures of story and beliefs. Every single thing that makes us who we are the experiences that we have lived. And each of those experiences is a story.
Yeah.
When others tell you their stories, you can choose whether or not to believe in said story. This is where we get lots of myths and legends that have been passed down throughout all of history. I mean, let's look at this Mary film, right?
Okay.
To which I don't know where you stand religiously, but I'm going to make some religious connections here. Mary 2024 is one of hundreds of retellings of the story of Jesus Christ's birth.
Yes.
Now, that story ties back to the Bible. And one of the biggest issues I have with retellings of scripture is the reductionist nature of each entry hereafter, right? Every single retelling is weaker than the one that came before it. This Mary film is not accurate to the source material, which is the Bible, and where there are missing pieces...
Arguably, for a lot of people, the most important source material ever. But also a source material that does invite reimagination, because for our modern sensibilities, the details that we would care about are quite sparse. I'm sure they were very important, for people within the culture. That's one reason why I think the Bible is not as read today, and will probably continue to go down in popularity amongst non-religious, secular readings of the Bible are going to become rarer and rarer, because it is just a hard text to sit down and get into, because the details you want are not provided. But that also might be the reason that it sustained for so long, because the details that you want that aren't provided are the ones that you can interject. I have only read a few pages, but I was planning on reading the Gospels. I was a few pages into Mark, and I read a part about how Jesus went to somebody's house, like one of his disciples' house, and he cured the house of some evil spirit that was going over it. But in my modernist, my modernist mind was like, well, was it that there was we're talking about him going in and exorcising a demon, like a la The Exorcist? Or are we talking about him going in and being work out some sort of dispute between mother and son, or father and brother, or something like that? It's it's so open to interpretation that my modern sensibilities were able to step in and make the story, start making the story. And I'm just, let's face it, I'm a YouTube video essayist kind of guy. I like to listen first and foremost to my narratives and my arguments. So that's why I'm having a harder time reading these days, amongst other things, I'm sure. But I do think that if you were to apply some imagination to an interpretation to the scripture, you would come to similar conclusions, except for in those places where it's super spelled out, and I think it's pretty rare in the Bible and pretty rare in the scripture to be super literal or definitive. it's very much open to interpretation. Thus why it's still an important book or series of books 2,000 years after the death of the main character.
In the Bible, this film embellishes. This film is not the only one to do that, of course, nor is it the only genre to embellish where source material is not there. Look at War of the Rohirrim. Hera was not a named character in J.R.R. Tolkien's books.
Yeah.
But anyway, we look at this Mary movie and, well, it's not very good. And it's not accurate to the source material.
But is it not very good because it was a Netflix production? I want to know how many Netflix productions right now are like in the fresh category.
In this case happens to be either the first or second most important event in the Christian faith, right? So it's very important to get it right because you've got millions of Christians who take this seriously. So if the film is not good and it's not accurate, does it not damage the importance for those who've never heard this story before to experience it at its best for the first time? Here, if the nativity story is either the first or second most important event in the entire Christian faith, and
second, the first is the Easter story.
This sloppy girl boss modern retelling.
Just going to say girl boss is, almost becoming a cliche at this point. So I kind of want to see where he's going with this. I might even have to investigate this Mary movie myself somehow if he's going to lay that accusation against it. It's definitely an agenda fueled mess if you're interjecting girl boss narrative into Mary's story. There's a lot there, and I don't think that girl bossing her way to the birth of Christ is an antithesis to the religion itself. I don't think man bosses are Christian figures in the least. Christianity is all about, at its core, it should be all about sacrifice and collectivism, and bossing is not about sacrifice and collectivism for the most part. Leadership could be considered that, but it has to be leadership with sacrifice.
Doesn't do it justice, then that's not fair to the original story itself. Let's take religion out of it for a moment, because I know too many of you will not be able to empathize with the point I'm making because you're so jaded on Christianity. It's like, you're talking positively about Christianity. I'm not listening anymore.
I do agree that is often becoming way too much. If something is Christian oriented, that it's instantly bad. I've had so many people dismiss Alcoholics Anonymous, and I say this as a person who enjoys alcohol, but I've had so many people in my life just bring up Alcoholics Anonymous comes up as a topic, and then they are like, did you, it's almost like they're like, did you know it's a Christian organization? End of conversation. That is all they have to say to validate anything. And it's yeah, there's Christian organizations out there. Who's feeding the homeless at this point? Do you think, there's so many Christian organizations and outreaches out there. Maybe that one is a little bit well, they don't tell you that up front, and so it's kind of like a deception tactic I could kind of get behind. But the fact that the conversation just ends in, well, did you know that it's Christian? That is to be said after that is assumed to be bad. I mean, I think the fact that he, what he's doing right here with putting his fingers in his ears is just a really great example, or, visualization of how people act when, Christian organizations come up.
It's yeah, you weren't listening to begin with. I said nothing nice or positive about the modern day organized religion aspect. The biblical story itself is and always will be the point.
Yes, and these biblical stories are the foundation of this. I mean, even these posters behind me, from a very, at the very least, agnostic band, spiritual in the most non-Christian way, are tellings of a future Christmas story. And I love this band, but they still respect the origins of the story and what it means, and how they and went out of their way to try to reinterpret it in a more egalitarian way. So
Humans are creatures of story and belief. Then having companies whose job it is to be the storytellers of this age continue to reduce the value of stories of humanity down for the sake of content, it will not have good consequences for our future. Eventually, you and I will be dead. Our children will be dead. What does the generation after that have to look back on? 2025 Snow White, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, Has-Been Hotel. What kind of myths and legends are we leaving behind? What men and women are so impactful today that stories will be told about them in 100 years?
My theory is that all these will be erased, and maybe some sort of like Chinese cooperation of the biblical stories with Chinese myth will then become the ruling stories of our times if we don't get it together and start, like just respecting and passing on those core biblical stories. And, not just biblical stories, but even like stories of, early fantasy, Grimm's fairy tales, these sorts of things that we personally all grew up with. Like, the thing is like, there was only so many stories. All of a sudden, at much of an exponential rate, we went from having a handful of stories to a feast of stories to a grocery store stories. In from the time that our, I would say boomer era, for the most part, from boomer to millennial, stories exploded exponentially. And there is something to having a nice, small, curated amount of stories that everybody is taught versus having so many stories that each individual person maybe has with them 24, but it's not the same 24. It's not, there's not even solid overlap with them in any other individual person. One person grew up watching Arcane and the Jurassic Park series / Jurassic World series. Another person grew up with somehow Indiana Jones and Bluey. It's like we need those stories to be similar for the sake of, or to have overlap for the sake of cohesion and connection.
Well, why does Mufasa sucking so bad matter? Well, the character of Mufasa represented masculine leadership and goodness. He was a gentle but strong father and a well-respected leader. And I'm just talking about the animated movie here. And that force of good is murdered by malevolence. Mufasa is less of a character and more of an analogy of the best human virtues. And the rest of the
100%. That's one reason that we have stories, is there are better ways of being than others, and you can choose not to follow those paths. I haven't. I have decided basically not to be the best masculine leader, but I will say that I would not want to live in a world where the best masculine leader did not attain or pursue, the person with the best potential to be the best masculine leader did not pursue that in their community. That would be a scary world. I intentionally went and put myself on the artist path, and I am suffering for it. And the best masculine leader in your community will suffer for choosing to go on the path that's taking them upon. Life is about suffering in a lot of ways, with respites.
Film is one of the purest forms of what wrestling with malevolence looks like, and why you need to be willing to rise to fight the villains who tyrannize yourself and the ones you love. Of course, there's much more to the Hamlet story that makes it a tragedy, but in and of itself, we can empathize with the Lion King characters. We can connect with these emotions because we've felt them too. And by making a new film with an uninspired origin explaining every detail of Mufasa's rise, you've...
Mystery. is so important. Like I said, the reason, and this might be something that this generation is losing, or not generation, that's like the modern era is losing out on, is the individual's ability to plug in their own thoughts into a mystery and both be able to say, this is how I think it is. That doesn't apply to everybody else who experiences this. I think it's very important. It kind of gives you your own sense of identity versus like having everything laid out for you. I do have to admit, like, Lucas possibly doing the prequel series could have had some negative effect on that. Anyways, let's not get into the prequels. Not yet, at least.
Robbed us of the importance of Mufasa's original analogical importance. Mufasa is no longer a representation of pure goodness. He's just another flawed lion that survived a couple fights by the skin of his teeth. You've basically shaved his mane and you've cut his balls off.
Whoa, brother. I mean, I know you gotta get, people's attention. There's a reason I paused right there, but still. No, he's right. He's right. Let's face it. Like, Mufasa was something bigger than mortal. I don't want to say human because he's a lion. He was bigger than mortal. And now he's been brought down with this film. He was beyond fault because he was almost godlike. And in cutting his ball, like, if you were to have the most, what's the opposite of generous? If you're the nefarious read on it, why would you want to cut Mufasa's balls off? Why would you want to humanize him? Just putting this out there, but maybe you see him as a patriarchal figure and you want to not deify that patriarchy. And there's a whole discussion to be had about patriarchy versus other systems. But if you first and foremost see him as a patriarch and the values that he represents aren't as important as it is for him as a patriarchal figure, maybe then you would think, like, let's take him down a notch as a patriarchal figure and damn the values, or at the very least, those values we'll figure that out later.
And worse, you've done it in the name of corporatism to make a quick profit on the fucking normies who don't know any better.
Yeah, corpo. If there's one term that I think is going to define the rest of the 2020s and maybe the rest of the century, corpo, we all have to be very careful of it. That's why one of the reasons I moved to consuming mostly YouTube is that it has a lot of independent creators who make their content for themselves. They are dictated by a corporation that is YouTube, that has the algorithm that they can change things on a dime, and they also have automatic AI inspired ways of censoring people, and that's probably just going to get worse and worse. But as of where we are right now, as long as you dance around or dance with certain topics properly, and you are willing to just attain whatever level of monetary compensation that you're comfortable with, and you're not just striving to hit the next level artificially. This is the one, not the one place, but it's my favorite place for people to, I don't want to say be themselves, but essentially, yeah, like they're not as directly responding to some corporate figure who's like looking at every move and every word they say. Yeah, there are some words they say that could get them struck down, but it's just not the same. So it's the kind of corporation that I ultimately like. And I'm not saying YouTube hasn't done ill. I mean, Coco Melon exists here. Anyways, we can get more into that. I'm sure there's going to be some reaction video I make that is just about like the ills of YouTube, just so I can, kind of like learn and also express myself on that. But I still think it's a much better platform than Netflix or Hulu or CBS or NBC or CNN. Like these things are where you have suits, corpos breathing down your neck, and you have to either align with them or just not move up or achieve.
J.R.R. Tolkien once said, "Evil cannot create anything new. It can only corrupt and ruin what good forces have invented or made." Now, the evil here is quite subjective. You could be referring to the person themselves committing the act, but I prefer to look at this from the perspective of the action, not the person. The act of diminishing the stories of human history is an act of evil. The person doing it may not be evil, but it is an evil thing to do. You're destroying the potential for those original stories to be heard by someone who has never heard them, and it could have changed their life. That's why geeks and nerds care so much about the death of their favorite franchises. Their lives are inspired by the values and virtues that these fictional characters represented. They themselves are better people because of the experiences they had with these stories. And every time some bitter, jaded, narcissistic fucking writer gets their hands on that...
There she is. Leslie Headland. I could go on and on about her, but I would just be parodying what I've heard in other YouTube videos. I haven't done my own research. But yeah, I do think that she's both... Wow, that is such a Tim Burton... Like, she couldn't have worn a more Tim Burton top, could she? But yeah, I think that she somehow is both trying to be originally herself, but they gave her Star Wars. Like she would be perfectly... It would be perfectly fine if she had just gone on making her own concepts or working in her own field, but like, and if you look at her pedigree, you would not think Star Wars would be like... I don't like J.J. Abrams having gone in Star Wars, but especially not Rise of Skywalker. But if you look at his pedigree, it was leading towards Star Wars. I would take the challenge to finding the female storyteller, filmmaker who could have taken on Star Wars. I believe there's one out there. But it wasn't Leslie Headland. I do believe a woman could write good Star Wars. Don't get me wrong here. But if you look at her work, Star Wars is nowhere near what she should have been working on. I have no idea how she got the project. I squirm at even saying this word on YouTube, like for somebody to clip out of context. But she brought like a very postmodernist take to Star Wars that it does not fit with Star Wars, and especially, I don't think in the way that she was telling the story. She wanted to tell the story of somebody who rejected the Jedi Order and was tempted by the Sith, but ultimately wanted to go their own way. I think that would have resonated. I mean, granted, you're kind of telling the story of Luke Skywalker again before Luke Skywalker, but I would have taken it as... But the thing that I really want to say about her, and I think that should be appreciated. I didn't think I'd get this deep on this video. I didn't think it would come to something I knew so much about. I listened to a Blank Check with Griffin and David. Great podcast. And they had Leslie Headland on for their discussion. They had a David Lynch series, and she specifically talked to them about Mulholland Drive. Amazing movie, and I'm sure that she was a big get for them because I presume at the time she had a not canceled Star Wars TV show on the horizon when they recorded the episode. But one of the things that stuck out, and she had a lot of great things to say about Mulholland Drive, and I thought she had some pretty good insights. But one thing that stuck out like a sore thumb to me was David Lynch has this divide between the, like kind of sunshiny, pleasant world, the suburbia, if you will, and then it goes underneath the soil, and underneath the soil is like this infestation of worms, of creepy crawlers, and that's sort of like the metaphor that he takes throughout Blue Velvet, but some would say his entire career, especially from Blue Velvet onward. And she said boldly and without being pushed against in that episode that she believed that David Lynch was not trying to say that one world was better than the other, like the sunshiny suburbia versus the rat infested or worm infested, bug infested underworld. And it's, this is where I am speaking. This is where I'm taking on my interpretations and my own personal biases come in here. But I think she had a misguided point in trying to make that, because David Lynch, I do believe he was trying to say that these two worlds will always be with us. But I also believe that David Lynch would tell you that the sunshiny suburbia is the good and the insect infested underworld is evil. But I think he would argue that it's not that. He would argue that they have to coexist. He wouldn't argue that that they are equal in terms of morality. And in fact, I think he has demonstrated time and time again. It's like what I think he demonstrates is that to be at the cutting edge, to be like an active participant, is you're going to have to weave between both worlds and do things that you don't think are morally correct. But I would never say that he would say that they're both equal on a moral scale. And maybe that's not what she was saying, but that's how she said it and how it came across to me. So, yeah, I am suspect of her and her moral compass, and of all the properties that somebody with a suspicious moral compass could head up, Star Wars would be a very bad one. There are many other things, like, based on what she said, I could see her doing a Lost reboot. I could see her overseeing modern Star Trek, but Star Wars is, maybe it's just very personal to me, but I feel like there's something biblical about Star Wars, something very true. Like it's a way of like, it's a pathway to the truth. At least it was. And those first, especially the first 3 movies. And the first 6 movies, like when you add the prequel series in, definitely like combine like biblical story to the Roman Empire. I think that there's a lot there. Can talk more about it later, but essentially what I'm saying is I don't think she was suitable for Star Wars. I have no idea how she got the job. I don't think it was a good job for her to take, but I also understand why she took it.
Of creativity, they don't make anything to further.
Filoni, this is bad of itself. Like he might actually be the opposite of her, and he's not equally as damaging to the overall franchise. But I think like while she tried to change it too much, he's not changing it enough. I want to go on more. I would love to be able to go on as much about it, but with all I said about where she's coming from, I think that I can sum it up by saying that he's not changing it enough. He's trying to maybe keep it where it is. His version of Star Wars was like really good when it wasn't elevated to being equal to the original films, when it was supplemental.
Don't make anything to further the mythos to inspire others. They fucking crush it. They bastardize it because maybe they didn't see the perfected version of themselves inside of that mythos. Or perhaps they think they could do this better. I can tell a better story. I can make better legends. I will rewrite history with my own modern spin on it. Then the normies and chuds will worship me, and they'll forget about George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and Walt Disney.
We will never forget about George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and Walt Disney. They are the names that are going to go down in the history books.
I want my name up in lights. I want my legacy. But then, of course, there is the third option, and it's contradictory to what I said I believe. They could just be malevolent. They could just want to watch the world burn. Look at that Joker 2. That was made to say fuck you to anyone who enjoyed the first film. Joker 2 is an apology to the Access Media machine for making Joker 1. Is there not some kind of malevolence there? All of that tracks back to Batman and Joker from the comics, right? Modern retelling to alter history to make it more suitable for modern audiences. Isn't that it? Censoring and dulling of speech and idea to not hurt the feelings of pathetically weak-willed vampiric parasites on society.
Wow, tell me how you feel about journalists. No, but I do think he has a point here. I have an entire theory on journalism and like where it went wrong, but let's just say the class war is upon us, and journalists as a whole are on one divide of that, and I don't think it's the divide that you and I are on if you're watching this. They are trying desperately, especially, like they're always aware of how people are reacting to what is coming out.
Isn't that the new cause? I think, as someone who feels very passionately about all this, clearly, it's the morons on the internet who clap like seals at the release of any form of, well, let's just say content. The people who unknowingly or knowingly are celebrating the death of human culture. These are the people who make everything feel worse. It's like being outside and looking in, and you can see the building is on fire. But the morons inside either refuse to acknowledge the smoke filling the air, deny its existence, or are enjoying the slow suffocation of death. We are culturally burning. And with every Acolyte, every Rings of Power, every Doctor Who, every new fantasy book that's secretly just smut, every classic video game...
Not so secret anymore. The secret's out there. No book is being written in 2024, 2025 that isn't smutty. I love this show. You're the Worst, and I feel like they were so far ahead of the curve on the trajectory of the writer character in that show. Go watch it, please.
And cautiously neutered as to not offend. Every adaptation that chooses embellishment and reinterpretation instead of authenticity. Every piece of media that serves to just be content instead of a story that someone needs to and wants to share with the world. We get one more step away from what makes human beings being.
Well, right there, what he said is so true. It's like the people who really want to share something with the world, and this is one reason that I'm like totally a YouTube person at this point is, and Twitter's probably, or X is probably the same thing. Sorry if you haven't heard. I was definitely in the, I'm going to call it Twitter for the longest time possible, or until time immemorial. Anyways, I was one of those people who was going to call X Twitter no matter what. And then what happened, which was X won Donald Trump the election. And at that point, I have to, I think for the respect of what Twitter was, or, at the very least for a division, because Twitter wasn't that great. We're just looking back on it with rose-colored glasses. But it was like, no, this is something else now. And that's something else. I'll give it to Elon. We're going to call it X. But to rewind on what he was saying, I think that the change here is that it used to be that if you had something to say, you had to... and you wanted everybody to see it, and you were like somebody who, like, I need the most amount of people to see it. It was that you'd have to create a movie that people all were driven out to see, or you'd have to, host or create some sort of television show or a radio, be a songwriter who gets something on the radio, blah, 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 blah. All of those were the medias of the time. And now, if you really have something to say, and that's what your first and foremost thing is going to be, you would be doing what I'm doing right now, what he is doing right now. You would be recording yourself on a video and doing the maximum amount of what what would you say, post-production for the least amount of effort to get your message out there, versus I think now we're seeing the people who are on radio were mostly fascinated with the idea of being on radio. The people who are making movies were mostly fascinated with the theatrics of it. And that's why they are there. And it's going to be great for a lot of those people. But there are some who are not going to be satisfied, having gotten to that tippy top that they thought was the most important way of getting their message out there, and then only just discover that the world had changed.
Without stories, we lose our beliefs. Human connection means less. Relationships mean less. Being itself and individuality, the things that make you, are meaningless. And I can already hear some of the fucking naysayers in the comments like, oh, you're such a child, does it really matter that much? I think it's the thing that matters most of all. Throughout history, it's storytelling that teaches people good and bad, right from wrong. History itself is a collection of stories. Science is all about the pursuit of a story. Why do things happen? Explain it. You, yourself, in the meat sack that you are just a big storybook of memories. And it's like, well, no. It's not like Hollywood is going to stop, or that stories are never going to be told again, right? No, it's more like the significance of stories is being lost with each retelling, reinterpretation, and reinvention. And if the significance of stories is reduced, and our future generations don't receive them, perhaps in the way that we did or we do, what do they become, if not mindless drones? I only have this point of view because of the stories I've lived, witnessed, and experienced, the stories I've consumed. And if you disagree with me, which is very possible, and that would probably be a good thing. That's a good thing, because what I'm saying is pretty negative. It's only because of the stories you've lived, witnessed, experienced, and consumed. Now, imagine a world where you're talking with people who are unable to even articulate a conversation like this, for it or against it, because they've never experienced the stories that have given them an emotional reason to give a shit.
Whoa. No, that's... Could we, this is something that I don't think was handled in Idiocracy, that I think he's arguing quite clearly, like, more... I don't know, like this... If you want to know when I was radicalized, maybe I'll come back to this video and watch this moment right now. But I mean, he's saying a lot of things that I have felt in my core, and maybe even thought, not as thoroughly, not as articulately, but like, yes, we are just a collection of stories. Like, somebody who has wanted to be a storyteller, this has definitely been things that have like pinged against my brain, like, the DVD, screensaver that just goes boop, 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 boop. Like these ideas have like at least like sparked off. I might not have grabbed onto them and like elaborated them and stretched them out, that like he has here, but he's definitely he's like almost preaching to the, not to the priest, but to the soon to be converted. But yeah, I do worry. I worry in the medium term, like in the long term, as long as humans are populating the earth, we will lose this thread and come back to it time and time again. It might take hundreds of years. It might take thousands of years. But we will get back here. The hardest thing to consider and worry about is that this disconnection with the technologies and scale of production that we have now, if we get away from this and like let things keep going the way they're going, we could eradicate ourselves. And also, you don't want to like think of a world, like you said at the beginning, where it's like we might be fine and our children might be fine, but the generation after that could be in complete disarray. You don't want to think about your grandkids, you know, or 2 generations of people past you, like having to figure it all out again. It might be exciting for them if they can, you know, get on it, but it would probably be like everything's in disarray, everything's like kind of apocalyptic, and then you'd have like 3 or 4 more generations of chaos, and then things would start getting figured out and going in the right direction.
They wouldn't know any different, and they would all be the same. Something to think about, certainly, and not something I can give a clear, definitive answer on right now. The best advice I would have is to learn how to be creative in your daily life and pass that on to the next generation. They're going to need it. Thank you for joining me for this pondering video. If you would please like the video if you enjoyed this.
Definitely going to like.
And if I brought you any value and you'd like to hear more from me and see more from me, consider hitting the subscribe button.
I was going to say, I always link the, I always put a URL to the videos I'm reacting to in the comments. So please open up his video and give him a like and subscribe if you have been inspired by what he has to say. That being the fake wizard.
Until next time, create, innovate, inspire, and for the love of God, cancel Disney Plus.
Hell yeah, brother.
If this video wasn't enough to convince you, I don't know what will. Godspeed.
Well, the price convinced me first and foremost. Definitely will be watching more of this gentleman's videos in the future. I really liked what I saw here. I'm just going to go ahead and give it a thumbs up. You know what? I'm going to go full-blown subscribe to him. Hell, wasn't that something? Now, before you move on to the next video in your next perfectly curated, glorious YouTube feed, please leave a comment on this video. Do you believe that storytelling is like a core pinnacle of humanity? What are your thoughts on that? Is this guy some sort of like, you know, oracle or deceiver from your perspective? Let me know in the comments. I know where I stand on this. I want to know if y'all could convince me otherwise. And as always, enjoy yourself.